Historic route. Standard time on the clock.
You're not just sitting there, that's where we're going.
What are you talking about? Just brilliant.
Second factory in the period, but the first purpose-built factory.
Where's the first one?
First one at Prince Alfred Square. So I'm going to start by just reminding you of some of the context for this, because if you think about the period of time of the factory system is 1804 to 1856. And there were 13 factories throughout the colonies, and it was a really important place, I think, for the female convicts of all kinds of times and places. But it was that real nexus in history where you've got the Industrial Revolution, you've got the Agrarian Revolution, you've got, in these women's memories, you've got the failed Irish Revolution, the American War of Independence, the French Revolution, and while they're here, there's also the Napoleonic Wars. So you've got such massive change, and in some ways that these women are the victims of the change, but I've got to tell you that they weren't just victims. They certainly, they enacted, we have the first female workers' action in Australia in 1827 happened here, and they certainly were stating their case. And that was when 100 women escaped through the town. They refused to work. Some people call it a rebellion, some people call it a riot, some people call it a workers' action. But that's a whole separate kind of thing that can come to a talk sometime. But when we're looking at that context, that's the context that these women were in, and they were experiencing that kind of starvation. Some of them were machine breakers, so we're really talking people who fought for our rights in Britain as well. The convict women were first when they were transported. They were, around Sydney Cove in the tents. When they moved out here, they were in basically huts along what we know as Church Street. The men were basically along George. And then after that, we have the wonderful Macquarie who started building places, accommodation for the women. This is a Macquarie commissioned site. It's a Francis Greenway design. So it is the sister, you could easily say it's a sister site for Hyde Park Barracks. And why do we, who hasn't been here before?
Me, sorry.
No, 1827? I mean, they talk about these Amazonian banditti going through the town.
That's right.
Yeah, and 40 sergeants running in different directions. But they all had bayonets, and if they couldn't have quelled them, they would have killed them. But it was about starvation and not getting enough food, so most of them were able to be brought back. But really, really important in that kind of a way. Why was it a factory? It was a factory because they actually did produce product. They did spinning, they did weaving, they produced wool, linen, linsey woolsey, blankets, sails and slop clothing for the other convicts, and also did work for the community around as well. As well as doing those sorts of things, there was also things like sewing. They did the washing for people. So think of this as, a large organisation, and although people think straight away prison, it was basically the place where women came if they weren't assigned at the docks. And in the beginning, in 1820, that might have been so many women, but by the time you're getting to 1842, you're talking 1,200 women. You're also talking their children, so you're really talking about a massive number of people. The first factory was didn't even have accommodation area. There was a room above the jail in Prince Alfred Square. The women could stay there for the night. There was about 30 places. When they built this, there were 200 women and their children. So it gives you a bit of an idea of the context of the place. They also did things like knitting, straw plaiting, this kind of thing. They definitely did that. Of course, if you committed a crime in the colony, then you would then be imprisoned in what we know as the third class. So and you could be in the third class for major crime, for theft, or for being pregnant on assignment, which of course was your fault. Nobody. This was the time when all that was happening. So yes, it was a factory. It was a place of assignment. It was a marriage bureau. You could come get a wife. There's a lineup of the good ones, only the well-behaved ones. They did have a choice in the matter. In fact, there was one gentleman who decided he was going to get ahead of the game, and he brought a bonnet to give to the woman. Selected the woman. They had a talk. She wanted the bonnet. She didn't want the man, so they ended up having an argument. So you get that kind of thing. They did have a choice, but it was a way out for some people. And rather than be on assignment with people who are not feeding you properly or not giving you the right amount of clothing, you might abscond or just not do your work, then you'd be sent back to the factory. But there was even a case of one woman who actually, I know, married because she could get out of the factory and rejoin her children. So that was a woman called Elizabeth Browning Owen. And imagine this, she has 4 children, she is about to be transported, her husband disappeared. The eldest one was considered too old, age 9. She's absolutely beside herself, but there was this fabulous man called Thomas Reed, who was an Elizabeth Fry disciple, and he made application for her to bring the 4th one. Brings them all out here. They're all taken away from her because she's one of those women who spread their pestilential influence, according to Mr. Marsden. And so she loses all her children. So within 12 months, she marries. And fortunately, it was a good man. She stayed with him the rest of her life, so she must have liked him. She would have gone that marriage line, and she managed to get all her children back. So, that's a typical kind of thing. It was also the first female health service in the colony. Yep, they could go to the general hospital, but if you were lying in or you had particular female issues, then you go to the hospital here. There was a fully fledged hospital here as well. So you've got that kind of service as well. And don't forget, I think, it is a place for all Australians. The men actually built it, and then the women were here, and it's a children's story as well. Keep the women in.
It didn't last long.
No, it didn't last long, so then they decided to make it into classes. And so you had first, second and third. First were people from the docks, second were those badly behaved from the first class, or well behaved from the third, and the third class were those who had committed a crime. So that's where you get it. And yes, of course, the workers' action started in the third class, but then everyone took part. Sorry. Women moved in 1821, and then it closed in 1848. And then it became the Parramatta Lunatic Asylum. And then it's been with mental health ever since. But the factory area itself, which we love to see as a museum now, is either storage or training or empty. So the further over, the north section is still definitely used by the clients. And you have high security ones just that way. Then you've got the rest of Cumberland Hospital over in that direction. So,
It was a nice
of course, he
guy.
also said they spread their pestilential influence, and he also said they were, incorrigible women. And yes, then you have George Millmaker, who's one of the unnamed Scottish martyrs. So he's coming out saying the place is, the people are rotten. Not here, but in Britain, the government is rotten. In their usual organisation, and I'm sure you'll see connections to now, the government decided to get one master weaver out to work in the factory, and he fell overboard on the way, so they had nobody. He was sent out as a convict, but he became both the superintendent of the first factory and in charge of other things like growing flax. Then you have Francis Oakes, who was the first superintendent here and the last one there, but also businessman, also the man who arrested, God bless him, MacArthur. and then you have the formidable Matron Gordon. She was here 9 years. She ended up leaving because of trouble her husband was causing with the women. I've read letters from her to her daughter, and one of her daughters died, and she says, I haven't had the heart to write to you, my love, because of the other one, and your heart melts. So she needed to be tough. She was actually the spark that started the First Workers Action. So, so you saw this picture of the gates. So that's the first. So both of these are Greenway buildings, and they would have had a pattern on them which so all the first floor had a thing called a reticulated profile, but I'll show you that. So we'll just go around the corner here now, just in this part here. And so this is the airing yard. So it would have been used for things like laundry, but also for exercise as well. And there was a gateway to the other side of that building, which was the third class yards, but we'll get over to that. Now, this is what I brought you to have a look at. So this is called a reticulated profile and was on all the lower sections of the buildings. And if you have a look, it comes straight up, goes out. It would have gone straight up and then straight back in, but the officials decided that the women were getting a toe hold to get out. So this is totally serious. Sheared off the top section of every single stone in the factory. And then after that, when it got to the later psych period, they shaved the whole lot off. That's what they did. But I love these because they tell you different stories. Can you see the different kinds of markings? Yeah. And even like we've even got one convict who was a stonemason. He's put his mark in there. So to me, each one of these is a story in itself, you know. And then we get the contemporary version. If they could talk. Oh, thank you. Yes. History talking. Yes. Yes, absolutely. So you really touch.
It's funny this isn't solid.
Coming here, and both were not successful, but one of them wanted to be superintendent and wasn't, and the other one was the matron. And he was so narky, he wrote a 40-page letter complaining. But it's beautiful, you know, from our point of view. Like he complains about the laundress drinking chocolate to the women. One woman reading a Sydney Gazette, looking at those sorts of things. One woman found with her arms around that of a chimney sweep. I don't think it was just sweeping chimneys, but so you're getting that kind of story coming out. So it's really fabulous record. I'm glad he was so narky now, but I wouldn't have liked to work with him. That shelter shed's a yard is where all the comings are going to. Like you're getting the wool, that early wool coming in. You're getting food for the women. You're getting the meat in. They had some vegetables here, but the commemorative wall is along one of the front walls. Now, if you take that distance to here and then take it again in that direction, that's the width of the original female factory. So just to get an idea. The yard went all the way through from where you were sitting in that shady area, right through into this section here. So that's the second class. So that was the second class yard. So now we're walking through the first class, and you gradually get worse as you go through.
So what was the
second class workroom?
Was a bathroom and a dining room there. We're just going to stop here for a minute. Involved with this, I found out with someone else that they were going to my part in my other role. When they did the archaeology, they did find Does anyone know Babette Smith? She was a Mountains woman. Yeah, okay. She was a Mountains woman for a fair while. Her ancestor was in this particular building, and her boys were taken away from her, and one of them died. She just never saw him. He went to the orphanage out in Parramatta. Girls went to where we're going next, which is the female orphanage. boarding school. Boys went out there. And then late 1830s, the Sisters of Charity come here specifically. I know they did a lot of other fabulous work, but specifically to work with the women in the factory. And there's one object that I would love to find that relates to them, and that's there was one sister called Sister Xavier Williams, and she advocated so much for the factory women that she was invited by the clergy to go to Tasmania. And the women made her, as a commemoration of her work, but also the first communion here, a little applique of factory cloth. And we have a full description of it because one of the oral histories from the nuns says, there was this really ugly thing, and described it in great detail, including, the clergy showing their ankles. If we could find that, we would have one piece that actually told you of the thousands and thousands of yards of cloth. But also, women they really advocated very, very well.
So did she go to the female factory in Hobart?
I believe she worked with the orphanage, but I don't know enough about that, so I will tell you what I don't know, and that's what I don't know. Well, we're saying we want a museum here.
Oh, yeah.
Of Australian identity and itself. But can you see how it's got that kind of shadow of the reticulated profile? Mm-hmm. Well, not the profile, but what was left. So if you see something like that, then it's likely to have been an original stone. This part of the wall's moved back and forward and up and down. The other part of the wall has stayed as it is since 1880. Factory story to date. So if you come in closer, you can sort of see.
So you think that's a symbol of blocking the...
And you're actually standing inside the building.
Good heavens.
Right now. And that would have been more matrons' quarters. You can see the original building in the background there with the cupola there. It gives you a sense of things. Originally, Gibbs was having no windows in that bottom section because he didn't think that the women needed the windows. But that was actually, yeah, exactly. Thank you very much. My sentiments too.
As long as the air conditioning works.
Yeah. Well, it was about why do they need any view onto the world? Classic kind of lock-up kind of size window. But when you're looking at it, there is just so many stories. People like Mary Hindle. Now, Mary Hindle was a machine breaker. She was part of, do you know about the Lancashire riots? Yep. Okay, 6 days, very organised. Walk into a factory, break the looms, walk out. No violence until the last couple of days, and there was a nasty military leader who decided he was going to get to the people. Anyway, of those 1,000 people, 9 were sent out for the crime of machine breaking, and 2 of those were women, and one of them was Mary Hindle. Now, Mary Hindle lived on Pleasant Street, believe it or not, in a little town called Haslingden. She left her daughter behind. She was in and out of the factory, and she sends a petition to the governor and says, I believe that you have granted pardons to all others who were part of the machine breaking. And she'd maintained she was only looking for her daughter, though I'm sure that wasn't the case from other things. However, then she goes on and she says, I implore you not to leave me here in this hopeless slavery. Now there's words coming directly from a woman about her ideas. She ended up committing suicide. So you get those women, the women are you and me in different sets of circumstances. Some just cannot cope, and then others can. Then you get, then you get other things, like the 40 women are out collecting brush, right, just over the wall. and they hear the races are on at Parramatta Park. One of them ends up on the... They all abscond to the races, and one ends up on the back of the horse with the jockey. So these are the kind of women you get. We're not going to take it. We're going to stand together. When they were pulled back because of the workers' action or the riot, who are the ringleader done? She was sent out at 19. And you know how you try and keep your kids out of trouble around that stage. She gets with this boy and becomes a receiver of goods. But loves her father. She has his initials tattooed. And then you get people like Constance de la Sablonais.
That was African? Aboriginal.
From Mauritius. From Mauritius. She actually had the right to be a viscountess. Wow. But she was the daughter of a slave woman and the son of a viscount. And the viscount himself actually wrote a letter acknowledging her, not for receiving any money, but for the title. But she and her cousin, she was age 8 and her cousin 11, were accused of poisoning the slave mistress, like powder in the tea. The judge records it as being a crime that had never been so viciously proved, and they were sent out here. So imagine African girls speaking only French being sent out. Terrible, but they were really lucky. The police commissioner, Wilson, at the time was a good man, and he wanted someone who could teach his daughters French. And he supported them their whole life. So when she wanted to get married, and you had to ask permission of the governor as a convict, he was there to support her. She ends up going out near Wellington and has 8 children and becomes a midwife. And I swear to you no lie, when I was travelling around the country for this Women Transport exhibition, I'd go to give a talk. All but 3 places, one of her descendants was. We go back into the next yard, you'll see a little plaque, and that's from the Sisters of Charity. And people think, where's the Aboriginal story? There's two ways to find it. One is the archaeologists show the mapping. I'm no expert on the female orchids. A lovely, attractive part of the view above that, which is by the one.
Oh, that's really nice.
Yeah, for Jeffco had a hospital. There with yeah.
It's a bit warm out there, isn't it? Yeah.